What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Katie Mox here with Will Brinson and Josh Edwards. And today we take a look at some prop bet odds for this year's NFL draft. Keep it locked with us every single week for all of your offseason news. And remember to like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube page. And if you're listening to audio only, do the same. Download, follow, leave a 5-star review, and tell your friends to watch and listen to the pod. Fellas, big week this week. I mean, maybe not necessarily for football, but we've got the NCAA final tonight. You got the Masters coming up this weekend.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, you don't look like someone that's heard of it with that hat.
Wearing a hat that says the Masters tournament on it. I mean, I know. I'm kidding. What's up, everybody? Look, this is one of those weeks where I am perfectly fine saying in a professional setting, I don't care about my job. NFL this week. Monday is the NCAA championship. My San Diego State Aztecs tonight, I guess it is. If you're listening,
mine too.
Yeah,
plus 300. Let's go Aztecs.
November 55-1.
Well, I haven't been on them but I do have a futures ticket on them to win. I can't actually bet on this game tonight because I live in Connecticut, and in Connecticut and Jersey, you cannot bet on the college teams. So it's like completely off the board. So thank God I got a futures ticket already for San Diego State to win the ship, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to take a money line tonight, which I actually think they can win.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I'm curious where you fall on this, Josh, too. I mean, as a Kentucky fan, you have to inherently be, into college basketball, even if your team is careened off a cliff into obscurity. That I'm just kidding. I like razzing Josh about Coach Cal, who I desperately wish would come to Raleigh. I mean, like I think there's a chance that UConn could absolutely smack San Diego State tonight. Wouldn't be shocked at all.
No.
Yeah, UConn is as I think Matt Norlander wrote, a wagon, as the kids like to say, Josh.
Yeah, I think I saw they need to win tonight's game by about 26 points to beat the point differential record set by a team in the NCAA tournament, which was Kentucky, 1996. So really? Thank you for bringing that up, Brinson. Yeah, absolutely. It was Kentucky, 1996. So there's some potential history on the line. Yeah.
You want to hear a confession? I got a confession that I hate. Mastering was 92. Oh, this is like Antoine. God, I loved Antoine Walker. Walter McCarty, Ron Mercer, Tony Delk. I mean, just a friggin' Nazir Muhammad. I mean, how many NBA players are on this freaking 96 Kentucky team, man? My God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 future NBA players on the roster of a single college basketball team. I mean, that team absolutely smoked. All right, so here's the scores. 110-72 is the 1 seed. 84-60 over Vatek, the 9 seed. 101-70 against, I believe, Rick Majerus' number 4 seeded Utah team. They beat a number 2 Wake Forest team, which almost certainly had Tim Duncan on it, and probably Randolph Childress, by 20 points in the regional final, and then snuck by a number 1 seeded Massachusetts, was Cal coaching UMass then? Yes, God, future Kentucky coach Cal was coaching UMass that year. I'm looking at this Wake Forest team: Duncan, Rusty LaRue, but no Randolph Childress. He was gone by then. But Tim Duncan Wake team, and then took care of number 4 Syracuse in the final to win the title. Rick Pitino back in the big games now. Man, that Kentucky team was good. So the confession I was going to make is that I grew up a Duke fan. That's not the confession. Although it could be. I suppose.
Okay.
And I grew up around here, love Duke, college basketball is everything around here in North Carolina. I didn't actually watch the Grant Hill to Christian Laettner shot against Kentucky in that regional final because my mom made me go see a play involving one of my cousins during that time frame. And I was like, so I actually missed maybe the greatest college basketball game of all time because featuring the team that I that team, the 92. Was it or 91? Was that 91 or 92? 92, right?
I want to say it was 91. I also did not see that moment because I was still very young.
Quite young.
Fortunately, I get reminded of it every single year when March Madness rolls around, so no problem there.
I'm trying to see. Was it the 91 team? Was it 92
I don't know. I was too young. I was too young for this one too, Brinson.
Let's see. See if we can figure this out. You're too young for it. What? I was 10. It's not like I was.
Well, I am slightly younger than you are, Brinson.
Yeah.
So.
I was only
in first. I was in first grade, and I was in first grade in 1991. So, anyways, all right. If you would like to watch,
too young to be watching college basketball.
It's too young for me.
It's a 92 team, 104, 103 in overtime. Arguably the greatest college basketball of all time. And I was watching like my cousin Jay perform in some play up in like North Wilkesboro. I was furious when I came out of there. It was like because you couldn't like check on your phone. It's like what happened? I can't remember how I found out the score. I think we went to a restaurant after it. People were like, "Oh my god, what a game!" And I was like, "That's great, isn't that great? That's fun." I was 11, so I wasn't like. Was I like third?
Well, 11 seems like a more like you can understand what's going on more than I was a young first grader. Because I think I was like 5 or something because I was 4 and whatever. It doesn't matter. Watch the men's national chip tonight on CBS at 9:30 Eastern. And don't forget to tune in for pregame coverage with us here at CBS on 8:30 p.m. You got the number 5 SDSU versus number 4 UConn. Don't be like a young Will Brinson and go to your cousin's play and miss the big game and San Diego winning in another buzzer beater by 1 point.
That game was incredible, by the way.
Oh.
The refs were terrible down the stretch, and San Diego State blew like some like really easy free throw opportunities, but got those offensive rebounds, and then had some really bad play calling late, and then all of a sudden just whoop. That shot was incredible. Anyway, you guys got Masters picks while we're burning time and not talking. Well, we got to have a heart out, so we should probably move on.
Yeah, we got to keep going. All right, let's talk NFL draft. First overall pick, the favorite is, a bunch of quarterbacks. Obvious favorite is C.J. Stroud minus 250. Now, Young was the favorite up until Carolina made that trade with the Bears to move up for the first overall. Sportsbooks seem to feel that the Panthers are really big fans of Stroud. Do y'all think that he goes number 1? Would you take this bet, or is there more value down? Well, of course, there's more value down the line, but actuality down the line.
By the way, this is also like kind of interesting. I think that like we're talking draft odds on this pod. I don't know if they do that on With the First Pick. I don't even know who hosts that show or who I know Rick Spielman is maybe on
Never
there.
heard of it before. Yeah.
Brian Smilson. I think
they rotate. I think they rotate co-hosts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you actually do it, don't you? Yeah. Josh.
Oh, yeah, that's
You're
right.
Brian. You can't give him the Brian nickname. That's yours.
I love Ryan Wilson. I've been podcasting and writing with Ryan Wilson since 1991, basically. They have great analysis. Like Josh does a great job over there too. Like
yes,
the analysis, but I don't think you're going to get the betting odds over there very often, right? Like you guys are. Like Rick Spielman's not like here's who I would hammer to go first overall. I think that. Oh boy, I think this is a tough one. So I think Will Levis and Anthony Richardson should be flipped in this. Levis was like 40-1. It's come down to 14-1. I don't think that at 14-1 he is a good bet. We've seen from numerous reports. I know David Newton said it. I'm fairly certain that that Joe Person at The Athletic had a similar report, but I'd have to go confirm. Not that it really matters. Essentially, the Panthers are picking between C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. I think, Josh, that this is makes sense because you have two guys in Stroud and Young who are more out of the box, ready to perform at an NFL level than a Richardson or maybe a Levis. And like, I'm not saying Levis can't come in and be an NFL caliber starting quarterback. It's just that you see his accuracy on the short and intermediate routes, and that definitely gives you some pause as to whether you could win right away with him. You've heard we know David Tepper's not patient. He may be, he's got a new coach and gave him a lengthier deal and is going to give Frank Reich the ability to try and, develop a quarterback and to get the best quarterback possible. Frank Reich also said that he and Scott Fitterer will have the final say on who they're going to take. So it won't be a David Tepper decision. If it's a David Tepper decision, I think it brings Richardson and Levis much more into play than it would if it's just Frank Reich and Scott Fitterer making the call. Now, Fitterer was in Seattle when So, and I think this is an interesting, if you look at the trends, Frank Reich has never started a quarterback that is shorter than, I think, 6'5". Is that when he was an offensive coordinator? Because he had Phillip Rivers in San Diego, and then he had Carson Wentz, who was a starting quarterback when he took over, when he came to Philadelphia, Doug Peterson. And then when he went to the Colts, he had Luck, and then Brissett, and then Rivers, and then Wentz and Matt Ryan. And I believe all those guys are 6'5" or taller. Maybe it's 6'3" is the number, but I think it's 6'5". Bryce Young, not 6'5". Really yeah, 6'5" is really tall. Yeah, that's like two of me. So the question is, Josh, do you buy into the trend of Frank Reich's, the quarterback height for Frank Reich's starting quarterbacks over his tenure as an OC and a head coach when it comes to making this decision? Because the Vegas odds certainly point that way, with CJ Stroud meeting that height requirement, but not Bryce Young.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think you can kind of talk yourself into any one of these quarterbacks. You look at Scott Fitterer and his time in Seattle and being around Russell Wilson, is that taken into consideration as well? You talk about the different timelines between how the owner wants to compete versus how the general manager and the head coach want to compete. Typically, the head coach and the general manager, those roles, change year to year. So would you rather have somebody that's going to be ready to compete from day one? And I think that is a guy like CJ Stroud. It's a guy like Bryce Young. So you're trying to find a little bit of a middle ground here. And I think CJ Stroud is probably that prospect that gives you some of that upside, but also has that high floor where you would expect him to contribute from day one. At the same time, I think this is a very volatile situation and it's very difficult to get a read on. So I don't know that I would be taking somebody that's a heavy favorite like Stroud. But that would be where I would be leaning right now if I were to make a bet on who's going to be taken first overall.
Yeah, I don't think you can lay the -250 with Stroud. And one of the things too, if you're building out and I'm trying to make sure that all these guys like Phillip Rivers, put the height, 6'5". Carson Wentz, I'm sure, is 6'5". So the other thing about Will Levis too is he kind of reminds me of Carson Wentz, and that's the sort of thing that keeps ringing in the back of my mind. If Frank Reich is really Frank Reich, I mean, he went to war with Carson Wentz with multiple teams and was willing to put his reputation and his job on the line. Eventually, it did cost him his job basically, because Jim Irsay got so pissed off about it that he fired him basically, for bringing in Carson Wentz. Matt Ryan 6'4", so I think maybe it's 6'3" or taller. I think that it's one of those things where if you're betting on the draft, you have to sort of learn how to, particularly with several weeks to go before the draft, you have to decide how you want to build out a portfolio, especially as it relates to the number one overall pick. So you don't want to throw a bunch of money on CJ Stroud -250. You can get a rumor at any point in the next couple of weeks that Bryce Young is the guy, and these odds will flip it overnight.
Right.
These markets are extremely, they're not driven by knowledge. No, I'm not dogging on Caesars here, but Caesars doesn't have any knowledge about who's going first overall. They are these are reactionary markets to rumors, and there's no bigger rumor mill than the NFL draft. In fact, we even had, a situation in 2019 where Josh Allen was basically -250 and Sam Darnold was +220 and Baker Mayfield was 8 plus 850, 14-1 the morning of the draft. And then you get a tweet from Adam Schefter that's the Browns have zoomed in, have centered their search, whatever it is, the old Woes tweets, where it's have heightened focus on Baker Mayfield as the new number one overall pick. And then all of a sudden the markets are cascading in the opposite direction. So it's I think you could make the case to take some Bryce Young at +220 right now. I would not take Levis at 14. I'd like Levis at 20-1 or more if I was adding some of that to my profile or my portfolio. And I think you could probably get Stroud at a shorter number eventually. If you've been doing this for several weeks now and focusing on it, you could have better CJ Stroud numbers. What you want to do is have plus numbers on several guys at a reasonable number. I think that's the move.
Yeah, how often? I've seen them start to limit their exposure too, because Anthony Richardson and Will Levis have both come down in terms of odds. I mean, Levis at one point fairly recently was over 30-1. So you've seen that number creep down a little bit to where the markets are kind of, realizing that maybe this is not going to go in their direction. Maybe it's not going to be CJ Stroud, and we need to open our eyes to some of these other quarterback prospects.
How often will, because I've only been betting on the draft for a couple of years now, and last year was pretty wild. Is the favorite for number one overall actually the number one overall?
Depends on the draft, I guess.
More often than not, you say, or?
Well, it depends on like when the favorite, like, so for instance,
like not morning of, like let's say nowish.
Well, Dave Otays of the pod will recall that last year, Aiden Hutchinson, I believe, was the heavy favorite to go number one overall. And then something happened around a couple weeks out, and Trayvon Walker got flipped to the favorite. Who's to say what happened? Whether it was somebody releasing a mock draft, or I don't know, someone having inside information and that being passed around and people smashing Trayvon Walker at great numbers. Who's to say? I wouldn't know. Trevor Lawrence was like minus 3,000 at this point, and that was even like free money because he was, you would have to, you'd have to lay whatever you had to lay to minus 3,000, but he was going to go number one overall. I think Burrow around this point was probably minus 500. It had just sort of become a thing where everyone knew that they were going to take Burrow at one. Kyler, I don't remember the exact odds, but I definitely bet some. Nick Bosa got some bad information there. Won't tell you who did that. That's Jordan Williams. In that person's defense, the bad information was maliciously planted, so it's not really good fun. Baker was not the favorite until the morning, until like about 10 o'clock the morning of 10 a.m. the morning of that draft. Myles Garrett, a heavy favorite, I believe, right? Because the Browns weren't going to take Trubisky. I can't remember what I feel like the rumors sort of settled in where they were just going to take Myles Garrett. Goff, once the Rams moved up, traded up, became a huge favorite, but you could have gotten him at probably a pretty good number. And I don't remember even betting on. Really, draft props might have sort of started, and sort of like the crescendo of the draft props were really more like 2018, I think, or the beginning of the crescendo was like 2018. So to answer your question, it's very draft dependent, and like it depends on the team up top and what their needs are and what the draft class is.
Right. And if there's one super, super standout, like you said, like a Trevor Lawrence, where of course he's going to go the number one overall, that's easier. But when you have these guys who
Burrow,
are
I think Katie was like kind of in the same. He was like a mini version of Trevor Lawrence in the sense that like everyone knew Burrow was going one, and like So it really depends on the team drafting first overall, I think.
Okay. So when we look at this number 2 overall pick, now you got Bryce Young minus 220. Obviously, it seems like he's going to Houston, or that Houston would like him there. They, of course, have the number 2. Then you got CJ Stroud at plus 200. Then you got Levis at plus 1,400 again for first and second overall. He's at plus 1,400. What are we thinking?
Josh.
Yeah, I think Bryce Young, assuming that Stroud goes number 1 overall, should be considered the favorite here. There's a lot of buzz that that's the direction Houston is leaning at this point in time. However, there is a lot more buzz around Anthony Richardson starting to build because of what he did at the Combine, rolling that into his pro day performance. There's a lot of people that have a lot of confidence in his ability to, contribute at the next level. And if you end up in the right situation, a scheme like the wide zone that has been made famous by Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, that would be kind of an ideal situation for him because you allow him to make plays with his feet, get out of the pocket, roll those pockets a little bit, and make plays in space. I think that would be a good situation for a player like Anthony Richardson to where you maybe consider him at number 2 overall with that athletic potential. So while I do think Young is the favorite here, I would be inclined to get a little bit of Anthony Richardson, have a little bit of exposure there just in case maybe Houston's got their eyes on a bigger fish in this class.
Yeah, and Houston fits. So, like, whereas the Panthers are, even if the Panthers aren't ready to win right now, I think that the Panthers probably believe that they can win right now based on the division, where that, like, everything with, the the Saints and Derek Carr are your biggest obstacle to overcome, assuming that, the Bucs or the Falcons don't go get Lamar Jackson, right? You have, or Aaron Rodgers somehow, which seems extremely unlikely, but still, you get the point. Carolina has pieces on defense. They went out and got look at the pass catchers they went out and got, right? Adam Thielen, Hayden Hurst, DJ Chark. These are like veteran guys who are clearly brought in to try and help out a young quarterback who they expect to start right away and to win right away. That is not this. These are not the moves of a team that unless it's unless they just love Anthony Richardson or Will Levis and want to just use Andy Dalton for a year, which I think is very clear they're not doing that. Houston, on the other hand, is a team that has added a lot of veteran. They're sort of building in a very Belichick Caserio type of way this offseason, bringing in veteran defensive players. They have enough on offense. They bolstered, they traded Brandon Cooks, but they sort of bolstered the pass catching core. They have a nice running back room with Damian Pierce and now Devin Singletary. So you could kind of make the case for Houston being a team that, maybe we're a year away. Maybe we're not ready to win right now. And I'm not saying that they think that, just like you could make that case. If that, if that's what they're doing, then Levis or Richardson make more sense. Because Richardson, I think universally, everyone believes he needs to sit for a year. Now, I was talking to Chip Patterson about this on Friday. We went and had lunch at the what's that?
I love Chip.
Yeah, Chip's the best. We went and had lunch at the Raleigh office. Well, the satellite Raleigh office, in satellite Raleigh CBS office.
There's a satellite Raleigh office.
Standard beer and food on Pershing Street. I ended up going back there later, but nevertheless, Chip was like, she's like, dude, Anthony, he went dogging Richardson, just like, everyone like sees the potential, and yet, you're taking a big risk. You're just assuming he's gonna be Josh Allen too. There's so much smoke and connections with Bryce Young and the Texans. One, you have Caserio and Belichick and Nick Saban, right? Two, you have a head coach, DeMeco Ryans, who played football at Alabama. I mean, if there's going to be a coach and a GM who are capable of finding out an honest assessment of Bryce Young and his ability to perform and stay healthy and to process and to do all those things at the NFL level, it's the Houston Texans. If it's not the Patriots, it's the Houston Texans, right? Like,
they also have John Mechie on that roster.
They have John Mechie on the roster they drafted last year. That's a great point. I'm trying to think who else. And if you look at, I was looking at this actually last week. I was kind of surprised by it. Do you know how many non-Power 5 players the Houston Texans have drafted in the last 3 draft classes? So in other words, a player from a non-Power 5 conference. But this is not an unusual thing that the NFL teams draft P5 players. I mean, you see more exposure. So it's instead of making you like sit around and guess, the answer is 1. And it was Isaiah Coulter out of Rhode Island, a 5th-round pick in 2020. Now, they didn't have first-round picks in either 2020 or 2021 because of the Laramie Tunsil trade. But, you see like LSU, A&M, Baylor, Bama, back-to-back Bama. Interesting. Florida, Stanford, Oregon State, LSU, Stanford, Michigan, Miami, TCU, Arizona, TCU, Florida, North Carolina, Penn State, Rhode Island. Like, this is a franchise that has focused their drafts on P5 players. They took multiple Alabama guys last year. They took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their 9 players were from the SEC. And I mean, these trends don't guarantee anything.
Right.
But if you're looking for connections to an Alabama quarterback, it ain't hard to find them with the Houston Texans, which is why Bryce Young's the favorite. If you're betting CJ Stroud to go first overall or second overall, you should just bet Bryce Young at plus 220 to go first overall, because those two are probably correlated. So I'm not laying the 220. I don't hate the idea of taking a little Anthony Richardson here just in case they want the upside. Again, SEC guy. But Bryce Young certainly feels like a pretty good bet to go second overall here.
Yeah. On that note, we are going to take a quick break. You're watching the Pick Six podcast. We'll be right back.
At stake, the chance to put on the iconic green jacket. So golfers, are you ready? Go!
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
A tradition unlike any other. The Pick Six Podcast here again on a Monday. If you're not following us on social, what are you doing? At Pick Six Pod across all social media platforms. All right, let's talk receivers, Josh. If we look at this, you got Jackson Smith Enigba minus 200. Then you got Quentin Johnston plus 450. Zay Flowers, what a name, Zay Flowers at plus 600. Jordan Addison, and down the line, who do you think will be the first drafted wide receiver this year?
I really like Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think for me personally, he's probably the most surefire wide receiver in the class. At the same time, I would be inclined to take Quentin Johnston as the potential first wide receiver off the board because he has that combination of size, speed, and ability after the catch. So for me, I think he offers the most upside at the position. However, I will say that you really have to consider the teams that could be in the market for the position at that stage of the draft. So you're talking about a run on the position possibly happening middle of the first round, maybe even early 20s, somewhere in there. You look at the Titans, the Texans, the Patriots, the Packers, the Seahawks, maybe those teams are in the mix. I do think probably the majority of those teams would be more inclined to take somebody like Smith-Njigba, who's going to work out of the slot, be a complement to bigger wide receivers already on the roster, whether that's Christian Watson, DK Metcalf. But I can't help but think that Johnston with the value here is probably where I would be laying the money.
Yeah. I mean, I think Johnston and Flowers are the two looks here. By the way, Johnson, as Josh points out, you talk about the size. Like, he's the only guy on this list of the top 5 receivers that's over 6 feet tall. Like there's two, I think Hyatt and JSN are both 6 feet even, maybe. Zay Flowers like 5'10". I mean, so in other words, like, there's only one guy who's got the actual size of, a prototypical number one. Like, a lot of these guys, like Josh Downs, who's not even doesn't even make this list. I don't know how far down Downs is, but he's like, again, slot style receiver. Not saying all these guys are going to be like that. It's just, size is important to NFL teams. They want, they want the, you want to be able to go up and win one-on-one. When did you make that face? It is. Size matters in the NFL draft, Katie. Size matters.
Yep. Say that again.
God, you really are falling into the host role here. You want, 6'4" is a huge difference as a wide receiver between 6 feet tall and 6'4". You're talking about if you get a Jalen Ramsey style, or a Sauce Gardner, you're getting a one-on-one matchup against a quarterback. Yes, you can beat a quarterback, like that with speed on the inside and cutting it. But can you move? Can you move certain wide? Like Josh Downs, for instance, I don't think teams will look at him and say, "Can you move him outside?" You're going to play him in the slot, and that's a hard projection to make on how a college player is going to project as a number one wide receiver. Remember, your hashes are closer. You have less room to operate. You're going up against elite talent on the outside. Whereas in college, you could draw some dude, every week, just because of how it works out. And to Josh's point, you start looking at where this first receiver is going to come off the board. I mean, it's going to be the under on receivers in the first round is probably a good look. Like, who's the first team that's going to take a wide receiver? Obviously, maybe, Carolina, Houston,
maybe the Seahawks at number 20.
And Metcalf. We're talking about 20.
Yeah, 20. Yeah, 5. I think they go defense.
Yeah, I think you can make the case for Green Bay at 15, especially as like an FU to Rodgers after they trade him.
Oof.
I don't think New England at 14. New England at 14 is certainly live for that as well. And they have to know they need speed down the field, and they've been terrible at identifying what wide receivers they want to bring in. I think Houston at 12 is a sneaky one too, where you add a wide receiver to pair with a quarterback that you take at number 2. Presumably they do that. Philly, for the love of God, Howie Roseman, don't do it. Stop trade for Tennessee. You could make the case at 11 that they need help at wide receiver as well. It would. I think it would make like if they added a wide receiver in the draft, I'm not saying that they would automatically be, an elite guy out of the box, but like if you threw like a Zay Flowers in there with Treylon Burks, and you have Derrick Henry, and I don't really have anybody tight end. God, this offense is so bad. But like if you added another receiver in the first round, Tennessee, you would feel a little more comfortable with what they had on offense. So I think that 10 or that 11 to 15 range is where you would really start seeing a wide receiver come off the board. Seattle at 20 is not a crazy idea at all, especially with Tyler Lockett getting a little bit older and suddenly into commercial or like residential real estate now, which is not something I saw.
What?
Yeah, he was like tweeting about like he's like house under contract. I was like, did he buy that house? It's very small for an NFL wide receiver, for like a professional football player. And it's like, no, that's his picture in like a little blazer, like selling the house.
Wow.
Baltimore,
That is interesting.
Baltimore, you have to think could consider another wide receiver early. They'll throw Lamar a bone. The Giants, there's just not a ton of landing spots. I think Kansas City is always live to take a wide receiver at 31, especially like a Josh Downs or somehow Zay Flowers is there. But to Josh's point, I would be looking at both Quentin Johnson and Zay Flowers as the bets to make here. Like I think this market is badly skewed. Even if Jackson Smith is the guy and he's the number one, like I think minus 200 is too much. There's way too much. There's a difference in what teams need and what type of receiver these teams might take. And the teams just might love it. Zay Flowers is a dude. Like I think Zay Flowers is a stud. I mean, I watch a lot of him. He's incredible. Quentin Johnson has that speed and that size that teams covet. So I think it should probably be more like even money for Jackson Smith. And then if I were betting this, I would have action on both Quentin Johnson and Zay Flowers, I think, to go first. And if scroll down a little bit, Billy, if Josh Downs is anything over like 20-1, I would consider that too. If he's not on there, don't worry about it.
To your point, too, I think when teams look at the size profile of a Zay Flowers or a Jordan Addison or a Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, as you mentioned, they may look at day two and say, hey, we can find a comparable player like a Downs, like a Tyler Scott from Cincinnati, somebody in that regard that, maybe we can take a different position on day one and still get a player that's maybe doesn't have quite the ceiling, but is comparable in skill set on day two.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, look, again, if Josh Downs is your guy, and I just come back to him because he's so slot heavy. Like he's 90-something% in the slot at Carolina, I think. If not, like, he might be 100%, honestly. And if you draft him, you're going to get him on punt returns and kick returns and all that stuff. That's great. That's a huge addition. And I think he's a dynamic player. And I think he's going to be a very good NFL player. But you are not going to, you run the risk of him not being on the field on every single snap. And if you're using a top 15, 20 pick on that, like that's something that NFL teams are definitely going to consider.
I agree.
All right, moving on to the first drafted defensive player. Will Anderson Jr. is the heavy favorite, the juiciest odds we've seen so far, minus 450. Then you got Jalen Carter plus 800. He's actually tied in the odds with Tyree Wilson at plus 800. Then Christian Gonzalez at plus 900. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, for my money, Will Anderson Jr. is probably the safest among this group yet again, but you also have to take into consideration who is making the pick, because we've already heard a lot of buzz that Arizona is possibly trading out of number 3 overall. So you can't just sit here and think, okay, Arizona, number 3 overall, let's say they're going to take the surest thing to kind of rebuild this franchise with first-year head coach Jonathan Gannon. I don't think you can do that. So for me, if that were to happen and then suddenly Seattle is sitting there with the number 5 overall selection and they're picking the first defensive player off the board, I'm more inclined to take the value on a Tyree Wilson or a Jalen Carter, because that's a franchise that is not afraid to think out of the box, but they're also looking for those athletic traits. They've gone for the Bruce Irvins in the past. They've gone for Jordan Brooks, LJ Collier, all those guys. I mean, it's typically at the end of the first round, but they certainly have a type. So I would be more inclined to take the value on either Carter or Wilson, while acknowledging that Anderson is probably the safest option of the group.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect analysis here, is that Will Anderson's probably more than likely the first defensive player off the board, just because he's, doesn't have the stuff, the off-field stuff that Jalen Carter has. I don't think Seattle personally, like, dude, you look at Jalen Carter's like, have you seen his mock draftable chart? It only has 4 things. It's like hand size, arm length, weight, and height, but it's like a perfect diamond, which is, I mean, again, these things there's all kinds of different, stuff that you can look into, but you just look at like Tyree Wilson's sort of profile from a explosive perspective, and guys like Chandler Jones and Alden Smith pop up as comparables, right? Taco Charlton, not as exciting, of course, but then you go and look at Will Anderson, and Kayvon Thibodeau pops up as one, but there's just some. It feels like maybe of a floor ceiling discussion, right? Like I think Seattle, if Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are both there, with Seattle at 5, and there's a very good there's a really good chance that somebody trades the 3 with the Cardinals, who desperately need talent across the board, have a new GM, have a new head coach, have to figure out what they're, that they trade out of that spot. And I think it's been pointed out that Will Anderson maybe not a great fit with that Jonathan Gannon scheme. So you can have a situation where if you take both Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson at 8-1, that you have it sort of covered if the Cardinals trade out, and then 5 is the first pick, where the Seahawks again could be taking somebody, or if Arizona stays there and takes a defensive player, but it isn't Will Anderson because they don't think he's the right scheme fit. Like they're not going to, if we have to assume the Texans and the Panthers are going to take a quarterback at 1 and 2, right? And if they do that, then the Colts are at 4, and if you want to get either Will Levis or Anthony Richardson and guarantee yourself you get them, you have to trade up to 3. And I think the Cardinals would probably be more likely to trade out at a discounted price. Not saying that they'll do it for free, but that they know what they need in terms of, and you got a Monty Ossenfort type who's coming from, has a New England background, right? Right? Am I crazy? He has a New England background, or is it a Tennessee background? Didn't Monty Ossenfort have New England? Whatever the case. Yeah, sure, sounds good. I mean, he was in Tennessee. Yeah, he's got a New England background. Yeah, he was the area. Yeah, he was he was in New England forever. You know what New England GMs like? New England Belichick proteges like to do? Trade down.
Mm-hmm.
Like it makes a ton of sense that Arizona would trade out of that spot, and that they would let somebody come up and get Levis or Anthony Richardson before the Colts could get him. It makes a ton of sense that they would trade out of that spot with the Colts, move to 4, and then let somebody come up and get the 4th pick for a quarterback, whoever's left, because the Seahawks are at 5 and have been out there flaunting it with every quarterback that they can get a selfie with, including Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. So I think it's a really, really reasonable case that Seattle, as Josh points out, is making that first pick at 5, first non-quarterback pick, and that Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson could both go above Will Anderson. And then, you have, I guess it's 6, you'd have Detroit sprinting to get Will Anderson. I don't know. Kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyway, that's sort of my thought there.
That was a very long, drawn out thought, but a very good one, Brinson.
A long way of saying I agree with Josh. That's right.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching the Pick 6 podcast. We'll be right back.
Oh, what do you think we're going to uncover out there?
With some luck, maybe a green jacket as sharp as the one you get when you win the Masters.
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Welcome back to the Pick 6 podcast. I'm Katie Mox here with Will Brinson and Josh Edwards. And today is an NFL draft prop bets odds show. Make sure you tap in with us all week long for all of your NFL offseason news. And of course, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube page. Now let's move on to where will they draft? We've talked about the Seahawks a lot already in this episode. They got the number 5. They've got the number 20. Brinson, I feel like you've put a lot of good knowledge about what the Seahawks can do. But Josh, what are you thinking?
Yeah, at one point, I thought that quarterback was probably the direction that they could go, and I still think it's probably the direction that they should go. However, as we kind of talked about on the last week's podcast with Brinson, they're out there taking all of these pictures with all these quarterback prospects. It almost feels like they're trying a little bit too hard. Maybe they're fine riding the wave a little bit with Geno Smith here. So I'm more inclined to lean towards the defensive line, the edge rusher positions there, but there's not a whole lot of value there either. So I'm not sure that really laying any money there is the best option.
Is there any chance they go offensive lineman here? 14-1 at Caesars, to go offensive linemen. We've seen them, they took Charles Cross last year. The last time they had 2 first-round picks, they went with Earl Thomas first and then took Russell Okung as a follow-up on that first-round pick. And so, I mean, you just sort of wonder, like, you look at where the Seahawks are picking, right? And they have 6 or 5 and 20. Again, at 5, if Arizona goes Will Anderson, there's a chance the Seahawks trade back. If the Colts take a quarterback and then Anthony Richardson's still on the board and Detroit, Vegas, and Atlanta are right there, if I'm just trying to think who, like Tennessee might move up, right, and take it. So I agree in the sense that like minus 200 is just not worth it to lay the defensive lineman / edge. So you take that includes a lot of guys, right? You're not getting any, you're getting a little more expansive pool of players, but you're not getting very much value at minus 200. Plus 250 for quarterback is too short. I don't hate defensive back at 6-1 if they felt like they needed to add some more cornerbacks, but traditionally they've waited to draft cornerbacks. So I guess offensive lineman would be my value pick, but I'm just not sure if there's a guy that they would take at 6 there?
Not at 6, because last year they also took Abe Lucas, who I thought played better than Cross in the first half of the season, but both of them are really strong building blocks for that offensive line moving forward. So you're talking about possibly using a top 5 pick on the interior offensive line, which is certainly not unheard of. Indianapolis did it with Quentin Nelson, but yeah, you're right.
No, that was my fault. Yeah.
They're not probably not going to invest that type of capital into the interior offensive line. So if they do trade back, let's say to Tennessee at number 11, then the offensive line comes into the equation. Maybe they get a Peter Skoronski from Northwestern to build that interior offensive line. Maybe they do look at one of those wide receivers that we've already discussed. Defensive back, they got a couple of quality guys in last year's draft class, but maybe they're, enticed by the idea of putting a Christian Gonzalez opposite last year when they got Tariq Woolen. So there's more options if they were to trade back. But as they currently sit at number 5 overall, I'd probably be leaning towards defensive line or edge rusher.
Yeah, so like Peter Skoronski, wow, can't believe I pronounced the name right. That's exciting. Is definitely considered, it's like first try too, is definitely considered a guy that would move, is a possibility to move on to the inside, right, Josh? Like, I mean, so that would fit what the Seahawks want to do. But to your point, like Quentin Nelson was about as a blue chip guard prospect as they come. Like, you don't see that type of prospect come along very often at that position. You got to be that guy to warrant a selection in the top 10 as a guard, I think. And so drafting a guy who played tackle that you're projecting a move to the interior, even if you're a run-based team like Seattle that wants to improve the offensive line, would be a surprise at 5. So yeah, trade down. I think trade down to like 11 and grab Skoronski is sort of what you need to happen for the offensive lineman. At 14-1 is probably not a great look for that. So yeah, I think no value on Seattle.
All right, let's talk about the Raiders. They have the number 7 and the number 38 picks. Obviously, the favorite is that they get a quarterback, even though they have Jimmy Garoppolo. Will Levis has been in that conversation. Is that where you think they go, Josh?
They actually brought Levis in for a visit recently, so he's certainly in the mix there to be taken. They're a tough team to figure out because now that they have Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm starting to lean towards the idea that they're not going to take a quarterback this year. And part of that is because they may not have a choice. If the first 4 quarterbacks are gone, if Tennessee were to move up, if Indianapolis moves up and suddenly they're the team that's left without a chair, then they don't have a choice but to not take a quarterback. So if you do not take Will Levis or Anthony Richardson or whichever quarterback prospect is still on the board, then possibly you're looking at a team that could be the first to take an offensive lineman. Maybe that is a Peter Skoronski there at number 7 overall. So I think they do have some options. You look at Christian Gonzalez, the defensive cornerback from Oregon, Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback from Illinois. Those are probably the directions I could see them going if they were to not take a quarterback. But I'm kind of starting to lean in that direction that maybe that pick is not used on a quarterback.
I think there's good value here at defensive lineman / edge for the Raiders at plus 375. You look at Chandler Jones' contract, and I mean, he obviously disappointment in 2022. after 2023, they can't cut him this year because they wouldn't get any money. But let's say you get Tyree Wilson there, and you grab Tyree Wilson, if he falls, because like Will Anderson goes 3, the quarterbacks are taken. Jalen Carter goes. Chandler Jones, you save $12.2 million in salary cap space if you cut him after the 2023 season. Like and then there's just 2, I think, void years on the back end, or 2 option years, whatever it is. Like he's probably getting cut after this season. He's going to be 34 or 30, he turned 34. So like they've signed Max Crosby to an extension, but there's going to be a void at some point in the next year on the other side where they want to rush the passer. And you're in a division that has Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert. Like you can't afford to be short on pass rush if you're in a division with those 3 quarterbacks, assuming we get Russ comes back to some kind of semblance of not being a total bust. So I think edge here is a really good value at plus 375 because everyone's sort of focused on them taking a quarterback. And yet, like Jimmy G, I mean, he's not a 1-year bridge solution. I don't think. I mean, this is a guy that, has played good football. He's a lifetime contract. That's what Jimmy G is.
Yes.
But like Josh McDaniels loves this guy. Yeah. I just think you're looking at a guy that they think they can win with the next couple of years or try to win with, and that they're more likely to beef up their, they signed Jacoby Myers and you just look at this roster. And I think like a defensive lineman is definitely a source of need. I mean, they could go secondary too, but I think defensive lineman at almost 4-1 is good value.
Yeah, I agree with that because then you could sit there and have that player learn from Chandler Jones and Max Crosby for a year.
Yeah.
That's an ideal situation, absolutely. But you look at Josh McDaniels. I mean, we saw this past year, he decided to move on from Derek Carr because he didn't feel like he orchestrated the offense well enough. Now you've got a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo that has that familiarity in that scheme, somebody that's going to be able to run it the way that he wants. Maybe that is an option where, he's committed to Jimmy G for a couple of years and not necessarily looking for the next option in this draft class.
Now, having said that, they can cut Jimmy G after this season too. So I mean, like, you never.
Yes. Send him back to San Francisco. All right, let's look at the Lions. They have the number 6 from the Rams. They also have pick number 18. I don't know. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are thinking that Will Anderson Jr. would be a good fit there. Or if they want to go quarterback, then maybe Anthony Richardson. What are you thinking, Josh?
I think they're almost a lock to take defensive line or edge if they stick at number 6 overall, knowing that they do still have number 18 overall, because I think you're more likely to get one of these cornerbacks with that second first-round pick, whether that's Deonte Banks from Maryland, Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, as we've already discussed, Joey Porter Jr. There's more options at the cornerback position when you look at the middle of the first round to the early 20s at the cornerback position than the talent that you could get at the edge rusher position, whether it's Tyree Wilson, whether it's Jalen Carter, Will Anderson Jr., if he were to fall to that point. So I'm more inclined to think that they take one of those defensive linemen or edge rushers if they stick at number 6 overall. But again, there's also the reality, the looming possibility that they're, going to trade down. Maybe Tennessee is the team that moves up, and then suddenly you're reconsidering all of your options for the Lions at number 11 overall.
So one of the things I think you need to look at when you're talking about what a team might specifically do at a draft is, like, one, what are their needs, obviously, and then 2, like, what is their draft history? Like, what are we seeing from a particular front office? Well, if you look at the Lions, like, is it Chris Spielman who's like basically like he's not their GM, obviously, but he's like got a heavy hand in this, and Dan Campbell, they have been very heavy on building through the trenches early in the draft. So the question for me with the Lions becomes, do they feel they built enough in the trenches that they can now go and use an early pick on someone on the back end of the defense? I don't know if they necessarily trust going cornerback that early, but certainly like a Christian Gonzalez could work if they wanted to add somebody in the secondary. They need to add people in the secondary. We've just seen the only non-first or second round pick that they've used, and they've had several of them because they had 2 first-rounders last year. Like Jameson Williams is the only non-trench guy that they've used a first or second round pick on the last 2 years. So you can look at it and note that most of their guys are coming from Power 5 schools. I just think that's worth noting. And again, we see that a lot with these teams, but I'm a little hesitant to say that cornerback would be the answer. It definitely makes the most sense. I think you could probably sprinkle. I don't think they go offensive lineman, running back, or wide receiver. Wide receiver, no. Yeah, I think it's either defensive back or defensive lineman / edge, and it kind of stinks that they're both minus money. Which, come on, Caesars, throw us a bone here. But you could reasonably put like 2 units on each one of those and feel like you were probably covered.
Yeah, I agree. And they have passable options at both edge rusher and cornerback. They signed Cam Sutton. Yep. They signed Emmanuel Mosley. They've got guys that can play that position if they choose to wait until later in this draft to address it. They've also got Julian Okwara. They've got James Houston. They've got Aiden Hutchinson, Josh Paschal. They've got guys that can play these positions. That's why it's kind of difficult to peg just exactly what they're looking for. But again, I think at the end of the day, it boils down to what you initially said, which is they believe in building through the trenches. They believe in having this, physical, hard-nosed mentality and somebody that's, going to win at the point of contact. So that's ultimately why I always come back to either the defensive line or the edge rusher positions for Detroit.
Yeah, and also disrespectful of you not to mention Lee McNeil, so I will. But Lee McNeil is sick, by the way. But I mean, I think you're right. Like they've invested a lot of resources. 4 third-round picks or better in the last 2 years on the defensive line. I don't think it's out of control that they would continue to invest there and believe that the defensive line is what is going to create good play for the secondary. We see NFL teams do this all the time. They just load up the front and let the back end become better because of that.
Yep. All right, guys, we got to tap out here, but thank you so much for watching the Pick Six podcast. For Will Brinson, myself, and Josh Edwards. Make sure you tune in with us every single week for all of your NFL offseason news. And remember to like, comment, subscribe on our YouTube page. For audio only, do the same. Leave us a 5-star review and, just tell your friends about us. And we will see you on Tuesday.